By 1997, everyone had made the jump to 3D. Mario, Final Fantasy, Mega Man, even kind of Sonic. Not to be left out though, Bomberman for the first time stepped out of his grid lines and into the third dimension, with a larger focus on single player in Bomberman 64. But oddly, less than a year later, another different Bomberman appeared, not only with the newfound strength to leap, but also with a suite of gadgets as he trades puzzles for platforming in Bomberman Hero. Why release these two games so closely together? How different are they really, and which is the better game that deserves to be on your backlog? Let's find out, starting with a little background. As with so many franchises, I was introduced to Bomberman first on the Game Boy with Pocket Bomberman, a game where leaping was the main thing Bomberman did other than laying bombs. A game whose name was lost in my memories and only revealed itself once I started looking back into the series for this video. But that's not how most of this series plays. Traditionally, your bomber is glued to the ground and trapped in a maze that's a mixture of indestructible blocks that provide cover and destructible blocks hiding items to increase your blast radius, the number of bombs you can place, the ability to kick bombs, and so on. Enemies are spread out around the arena, and the last Bomberman standing wins. Most of this series seems meant for strategic multiplayer fun as you outmaneuver your opponents. But much of this was lost on me, as the closest I've gotten to a traditional Bomberman was when I purchased Bomberman Tournament for the Game Boy Advance, which, while it was top-down, mixed things up with a large open area sprinkled with bomb puzzles and a Zelda/RPG-like campaign, as well as what pushed me to buy the game in the first place, Pokemon like Cherubums to collect and battle. Then, years later, for reasons I do not remember, maybe for multiplayer, I purchased a copy of Bomberman Jetters, which saw the same creatures return along with a bright but linear world to destroy. So I had absolutely no idea what to expect going into these two N64 games. Would I jump, capture monsters, complete quests, just navigate a maze, or do something completely different? Let's find out. Well, in 1997, the N64's first Bomberman game released, which just keeps things simple and down to earth by stuffing the console's digits into the title with Bomberman 64, which kicks off an interesting mix of both more backstory than I would have expected and less, as these four janitors wrap up their cleaning of one planet and then carpool over to Planet Bomber to give this town of multicolored Bomberman a good scrub, while the inventively named main character, White Bomber, watches ominously from afar, approached not by police looking for an alibi, but by a transformer who jumps to some wild assumptions about your plans to fight back and offers to help, even though this Autobot says they already have a bone to pick with these villains, and they know a weird amount of details about the invading ship, and oh, okay, we're playing the game now. And by play, I mean this mysterious stranger tells you how to move your legs and throw your bombs, something I assumed all Bombermen were able to do from birth, but once again throws into question if Bomberman is avenging his fellow bombers of his own free will, because I'm starting to feel pushed into this. But with your newfound ability to move, you'll quickly discover that this is a Bomberman game, where you'll proceed to set bombs on the ground, destroying enemies and obstacles for 20 levels. But it is a little different than previous 2D entries, so let's start with the things I like that make this entry stand out. Obviously, the staple of the series is the bombs, but so often in previous games you'd find yourself stuck in a trap of your own creation, waiting for death to come for you. This is unless you manage to grab a life-saving power glove or kick power-up. But Bomberman's been training non-stop for their 3D debut, and it shows with the strength to lift and kick bombs all day long, which not only gives you more flexibility in puzzles, fighting off enemies and saving yourself, but also is much appreciated, as normally you'd lose these powers on death, and it's just one less thing to collect. But don't worry, you will be picking up plenty of in-level upgrades to reach dangerous explosion levels. It's just a little more streamlined, with no more speed-boosting roller skates and no negative power downs like you typically see in multiplayer. Instead, you'll shatter ornate pottery and other obstacles to increase your explosion size, give yourself more bombs to place at once, upgrade to the eye-catching, much more dangerous red bombs, and trade in your old-fashioned and unpredictable sparking fuses for remote-controlled ones, all of which stick with you as you make your way through levels in a given world, even if you die, which is pretty lenient. You'll only have to restart your explosion progression if you find yourself out of continues and staring at a game over screen, or when heading to a new world. And while, yes, this road has been traveled by almost every other Bomberman game, it's still very fun to play. But don't even worry, we're not repeating the past. Hudson Soft knows those two-dimensional plus-shaped bombs are so 1996, and the people of 1997 expected and deserved fully 3D spherical explosions. A disgusting betrayal of the series, I know. But the radius of these abominations does make dealing with moving enemies a little easier, especially when combined with your stunning kicks and throws that eliminate the tedious timing of past games, as you waited for them to perfectly line up, which would have been even more difficult with these more open levels. But what about for larger groups, where a practically prehistoric cross bomb could have spanned the battlefield taking out multiple enemies? Well, doing his best Spirit Bomb impression, we're able to pump up your held bomb to an enormous size, leading to a larger explosion that can take out multiple enemies. In addition to the Fire Up, which increases every explosion radius, and Bomb Up, which lets you throw out multiple large or small bombs. Together, you've got a recipe for avenging your fellow bombers in the most dangerous way possible. Those larger bombs are required for certain breakables, and thankfully play a little chime if your tiny bomb isn't up to the task. But a little trial and error is needed, as some require a red bomb power-up first, for even more power. Though I do wish there were different materials visible that made this more apparent than just throwing bombs at the wall to see what crumbles. I had hoped all these expanded bomb options, throws, kicks, and especially remote bombs would lead to interesting new enemies that required different strategies to take out. But at most I was throwing remote bombs, then triggering them in mid-air, and mostly for blocks, not really enemies. Combat, if that's what you'd call this, was more about stunning enemies so that I could stack up bombs next to them without much variation. Those new 3D bombs do have a negative, and that's readability. Because unlike the old cross bombs in a grid, from past games where picking up a Fire Up meant your explosion grew by one single square more, here the spherical explosion is just larger in a nebulous way. Also, unlike past games, nothing really blocks your explosion, so a large enough bomb will just clip through a piece of scenery and hit you, unlike the distinct lines of the past. Which led to a ton more accidental deaths for me, especially if something ever caused a bomb in motion to detonate early. Like say if you kick a bomb into an ongoing explosion. Which yes, could totally happen in the past games, but the defined lines and grid just made it much easier to judge than with this game's flat sprite moving through a 3D world and bumping into spherical explosions. Or walls, because bombs are surprisingly bouncy, and in my experience mostly bounce directly into your face, forcing you to sit and collect your thoughts while a bomb detonates next to you. The extremely suspicious Sirius from earlier pushes Bomberman through 5 worlds, each one chained together to make sure that Bomberman, like all great video game heroes, at least takes the time to visit a grassy, fiery, and icy world along the way. How these clusters of land manage to float and travel through space without the power of the Chaos Emeralds is apparently beyond the scope of the story and not explained. But they do supply plenty of variety in levels, with much more going on than any previous grid-based Bomberman game that I've tried. Free from those restrictive lines, you get to explore much larger, more open areas with elevation, hidden paths, and tons of small objects to clear out of the way. As you not only defeat these villainous invaders, but make sure they will never have a place to call home again. Yeah, we're the heroes here. Now, the worlds are mostly a change of scenery with new obstacles to destroy without a massive change in what you'll actually be doing in a given level. There are some stages with unique mechanics, like this ice stage that positions the camera under bomb-proof ice and has you using the momentum of a good sledding hill to reach certain paths. Is this a good camera angle? No, but it was memorable. Does Bomberman feel built for sledding or these narrow slippery paths? Not especially. Do you see any expansion on these ideas in the world's other levels? No. My experience with older Bomberman games was mostly combat-heavy stages on repeat in an enclosed arena. But I was so excited when in the very first level of 64, I came across an extremely simple little puzzle. A cage that you can't just enter unless you kick a bomb into a load-bearing column. With later stages introducing things like pressure plates to control the water levels in a canal so you can progress. Or laser floors and more, as small interactive and non-combat things are introduced throughout the game. Yes, they are simple, but I always looked forward to each new puzzle or interaction no matter how small, as they took advantage of the 3D stages and provided a new twist on the solid but familiar bomb-based destruction in the levels. The further I played, I did start to wonder if Bomberman maybe leapt into the third dimension a little too quickly. First off, it's not immune to the generally terrible cameras of the time, as a lot of the levels do not feel built for the camera you're given, which locks into 1 of 8 angles, with most feeling useless and leaving me guessing at where my little Bomberman was. Sure, some objects can be destroyed to give you a better view, and I'm all for hiding secrets, but why include so many large camera blocking objects in the first place. Also, those coming off the smooth analog control of other N64 games might find Bomberman's control less than ideal. Like the camera, you snap to 8 directions, but aren't allowed to use the D-pad. Maybe Hudson felt 352 less options would make aiming bombs simpler, and they do seem to apply this limit to most enemies. But for this bold new dimension, it's an odd limitation that you'll probably get over quickly. Then there are the bosses, who for the most part are fun challenges in smaller arenas as you outmaneuver their attacks, throw and kick bombs at them in much more frantic and dangerous encounters than pretty much anywhere else. Though, once again, I had issues judging depth while throwing 2D sprites at 3D enemies, especially ones who were high off the ground. Less interesting bosses see you facing off against the main villains in not quite throwback arenas, which felt like stun lock fests, as you both pelt each other with bombs, hoping to get the last hit in, and these I could have done without. Boss encounters are what caused the most game overs for me, which in turn meant losing all of my power-ups, making me choose between trying to brute force the boss with smaller explosions and less bombs, or to go back a level to collect items, where I found myself wishing for power-ups like the speed-up roller skates to return to let me quickly go through these levels and collect all those items again. These were mostly a blast to play. They felt so different from the main levels, featured unique bosses and varied arenas, and I always look forward to these, even if you have to be extra careful to not end up detonating your own bomb by clipping a projectile or standing too close to the boss when you set yours off. Now, I always try to keep these videos spoiler-free in the hopes that if you're interested in playing any of these games for the first time like me, you can take a recommendation and go experience it for yourself. But I have to talk about a spoiler today, in a mechanic that's introduced very late in the game and is the biggest missed opportunity in this entire game, and also my biggest shame. I personally would have loved to have this knowledge up front, but if you want to go into Bomberman 64 with a blank slate, I've included time codes, so please feel free to skip to the next section. Throughout this game, I was hoping for more interesting puzzles and more interactivity with the levels themselves, as the small glimpses helped break up the standard combat while also taking advantage of the new 3D environments and hinting at a more complicated adventure that never materialized. Well, right before you defeat the final boss, they escape. After which Sirius flies over to say he's not mad, just disappointed, and the credits roll. As I sat wondering how this ended with such a thud, a new mechanic was introduced, the ability to cross large gaps with bombs. Crossing gaps was partially explained in the first level, but I never put the pieces together or found what seemed like suitable areas to use or try this on more. So that's neat, but it's probably not game-changing. Then, in what amounts to a GIF in the credits, they show how to construct a bomb ramp or bridge, which allows Bomberman to access this mysterious tower from the very first level, which I remembered wondering about and assuming I'd come back with some new power-up or ability later in the game, followed by Sirius flying up and killing you like a less bloody GoldenEye intro. I was interested to find out what was going on with Sirius, so I went back to build the bridge from the video, and after 30 minutes with no luck, I went and watched videos on how to create these structures more easily, and still couldn't manage to get up to that tower. The next day, I looked up what these were used for, and it turns out they mostly lead to golden cards, which unlock the true ending. So I tried again, and I actually collected all 4 cards on the first level, and it took me 2 hours. These structures require very precise bomb sizes, bomb placement, and timing as you leap onto them. For hours, I would try and try, then miss one throw or get stuck in a bounce that seemed endless, wondering if I should reset the game or if I would eventually bounce out. What I would have given for these to snap into a grid when bouncing, or for the required structures to take less setup, or just anything to make this easier to do. I watch videos of people doing this perfectly. I know it's a lack of skill on my part, but this feels so unpredictable and I just cannot seem to nail the placement consistently. Which sucks, because it led me to another bouncing puzzle that was really interesting and unlike anything I saw in my main path. I also love that this is just knowledge. It's not a power-up or an unlockable, and yet it fundamentally changes how you look at these levels, opening up more secrets, collectibles, and things I missed the first time. On one hand, this hint did make me want to start back on level 1 and try these tricks out, but on the other, I wish this had been slowly taught to me throughout the stages rather than what amounts to an end credits tutorial video. I'd peel back layers as I progressed while learning that simple seeming stages held bigger secrets that I could access without waiting on some possible power that would never come. I started down the path of replaying levels, but the bomb structure proved too frustrating for me to build consistently, and the thought of spending 2+ hours on each stage as I slowly constructed towers was demoralizing, especially when finding out that the good ending and extra world are locked behind 100 cards, of which I had naturally found 44, and after hours of failing my engineering classes, now had 48. Maybe if you just can't get enough of this game, or even knew this info from the start and slowly learned to master building, this wouldn't be such a huge late game task. I also can't deny how cool it is to have a mechanic like this hidden in plain sight the whole time, but it was so well hidden for me that I missed out on what feels like the most interesting parts of every single level. But let's rewind. Years before Bomberman 64 released, Hudson partnered with another company, AI, a combination of the two founders' last names, not for anything artificial or intelligent. That studio had worked on several Bonk games for Hudson, and according to this article on Unseen64, in 1995, we're also planning a new exclusive Bonk game for the Ultra 64 that would have been the first 3D Bonk game to be released. In the end, they decided to cancel the project and focus on other titles. Then, after some years, Hudson and AI took the early work they had done on Bonk 64 to develop Bomberman Hero, which was finally released in 1998. Unseen64 cites an interview with Shouichi Yoshikawa, a director of several Bonk games. The interview contains one question and answer about Bonk 3D, otherwise known as Ultra Genjin. But the article doesn't seemingly contain any mention of 1995 being the start of development for Bonk 3D, how much time passed, or what was reused from the previous project as it morphed into Bomberman 64. The quote reads, "Ultra Genjin was being planned during the game industry's transition from 2D to 3D games. I studied the practical aspects of this quite a bit, but I think that nobody really knew what should be done with games at the time. As a result of trial and error, we were able to adapt the design for Ultra Genjin to Bomberman Hero." To me, this development history still feels hazy. How much of the mixture was Bomberman? How much was Bonk? Was it just the shell of a 3D engine reused, or specific abilities or elements? We may never know. And the only reason I bring this up is because Hero plays a little differently than 64. Were you lulled to sleep by Bomberman 64's slow movement speed, disturbed by White Bomber's inability to jump as his pockets overflowed with heavy bombs? Do you wish Pocket Bomberman could leap out of the Game Boy and into your CRT? Well, have I got the game for you. Bomberman Hero is the premier character platformer in the Bomberman series. You can jump, fly, ride, swim, and fly some more. Just comparing the two intros, I can tell you what game I as a child would have picked, and maybe that's why this exists, to give Bomberman a shot at a new genre maybe, or to introduce platformer fans to Bomberman. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's carve our save file into Bomberman's face and see what's up with Bomberman's lore in this game. Well, this human space princess gets tractor beamed into an ominous ship, hiding intel in a trustworthy robot to pass along to Bomberman, who once again is everyone's first choice for Hero, yet he literally just finished basic training. His first assignment, investigate the UFO that just crash landed, hiking through several levels up to the mountains and our first boss fight, which is extremely similar to 64's, where the camera's locked to the boss while you strafe and throw bombs. But this immediately feels much more action heavy, with both you and the boss's extra agility. After which we're told that Primus Star has been invaded by the Garridan Empire. Princess Million attempted to escape with a CDR, which was passed through Piebot and into your hands. With the princess still in the clutches of the evil empire, your quest to rescue her begins. For good or for bad, you no longer have a serious-like character guiding/demeaning you throughout your journey. And the story is mostly rescue the princess. But with so many Star Wars parallels, I'm fully expecting a Darth Bomber to show up very soon. Luckily, your path to the extremely Death Star-like planet is a fun one. This game feels much more built for a control stick than the last game did, with its character snapping into one of 8 directions. Here, you have full 360-degree movement, which is a small thing but just makes moving around the world feel immediately better. And while I speculated earlier that the 8-way limitation might have been there to help with aiming, I didn't notice any drop off in ease of throwing bombs at enemies, especially with the continuation of spherical explosions that continue to disrespect Bomberman's legacy. Let me preface this with the fact that I'm a sucker for platformers. If you put a jump button into a game and it feels even halfway decent, chances are high that I'll joyfully hop around whichever levels you throw at me and finish your game. And you know what? This game's fun. You're given two types of jump, running and normal. Just because Bomberman skids to a stop on quick turns does not in fact mean a flip is coming, or a dive, kick, or any other traversal abilities. It's a simple platformer. Most levels feature wide walkways, large platforms to jump on, and the levels are short. Sometimes so short you can almost see the exit from where you started. It reminds me a lot of the Kirby games. None of these levels are very difficult, but there's tons of things to collect on each one, and you'll be encouraged to replay levels in order to reach the high score and get a 5 out of 5 on each level. You'll also regularly finish a level and just skip right past the next in the list, needing to go back and find a secret exit if you want to experience it. And with how bite-sized these levels felt, replaying for points or secrets always was a fun time. What also helps is the sheer variety of levels, enemies, and items you've got to play with. Starting with Bomberman's combat potential. Setting a bomb on the ground or kicking is so last year. Instead, this game's all about throwing. You'll toss with a speed not possible in the last game, so fast that you can chain the explosions to damage yourself quite easily, and I did this frequently. The big bomb is gone, replaced instead with a multi-ball bowling strike, which has a really short range, so you'll find it most helpful for large groups of close things like chicken nesting dolls. My personal favorite is this plop attack, where you just hop over an enemy's head and leave them a surprise as you just continue on. This game does leave behind almost all of the strategy and planning used to trap your enemies in an explosion from the previous Bomberman games. Instead, you'll just toss your explosive projectiles around as you bounce through levels. You'll fight off slugs with salt bombs, put enemies on ice with your freeze bombs, become a bubble boy, walk through walls, all while you fight through evil clowns, sphinx, snowmen, and just an incredibly strange assortment of enemies on every level. Sure, it's not going to blow you away with platformer originality or groundbreaking new features, but the variety does lead to some standout levels, like this mirror room. And it's just simple fun, with lots to collect, bringing me back to a simpler time where I could just jump without a care in the world. Oh, and will you look at the time? It's full-blown collectathon mascot platformer clock, so of course, we're not going to be satisfied with Bomberman just jumping around. No, he's gotta have more. Luckily, the Space Cops gave him a whole suite of power gear to help him on this solo rescue mission. The Bombercopter is perfect for maximum bomb plopping as you rain fire from above, taking revenge for what happened all those years ago in '64. The Bomber Jet proves that if common animals can fly, so can Bomberman. The Bomber Slider is here because with SSX still 2 years away, it's time to corner that snowboarding market. And last, but maybe also least, the Bomber Marine, a not quite redundant inclusion which is one button away from being identical to the Jet, but you can use your arms this time to swim backwards. Take that, Jet. Almost every time I picked a level and suddenly saw Bomberman's Sailor Moon transformation, it caught me off guard. They definitely add more variety to the game, but I'm not sure why they're here. And if they were remnants from a prehistoric Bonk game, how would they have fit there either? At worst, these feel like a bullet point on a box. At best, they're fun distractions from the standard jump and bomb of the main game, and they don't come up so often that they're going to wear out their welcome, though it is a little hard to see where you're aiming with no Star Fox reticle as Bomberman's jets and propellers block your view. You'll even befriend and ride Louie, a large leaping rabbit that you'll use to wall jump around in only 2 stages. None of these mesh into Bomberman's normal skill set as cleanly as the puzzles in '64. These are big 180s in the gameplay style, but while confusing, I still enjoyed them. I know we're dealing with a whole different style of game and development studio here, but in the timeline of Bomberman games on the N64, I was really glad to see that your newfound ease of movement and agility led to better boss fights too. Sure, they can still spam attacks, stun lock you, and some aren't the most original, but this time I felt like I could actually handle what the bosses threw at me, where the last game's added stiffness got in the way of more fast-moving sections like bosses. In a much less interesting way than in '64, they do lock another final world behind a completionist wall, with you needing to collect not only 24 ADOC bombs, collectibles I never remember stumbling upon naturally, as well as achieving 5 out of 5 on every single level, which doesn't just involve collecting everything and defeating everyone in a level, but also taking out bosses extremely quickly and efficiently, something I only know because wikis told me. Same as with 64, I went back to the first few levels to see how easy this was, and it took way too long, especially when faced with repeating this across the 68 total levels I've already played. As with the last game, if you just cannot get enough, you've got a ton of extra content to seek out. And if you feel it's time to move on, like me, you can easily get one unlockable for free, as a special world was locked behind a Japan-exclusive controller, which had a turbo mode for its start button, which funnily enough, you can unlock yourself by turning the game on and mashing start as fast as you can from boot to title screen, allowing you to play these stages bursting with murderous clowns for free. Now with a pair of credits rolling, let's answer those questions from earlier. First, why were these releases so close together? Well, actually, Bomberman releases were happening at least once a year at the time, usually more frequently. So the only thing that's unique here is that they snuck a platformer into one of the yearly slots. As far as how different the games are, I hope I've more than covered that. So which is the better game, and do either deserve to be on your backlog? Well, answering that is harder than I expected. Even the people seem split on which is a better game, as they sold nearly identical amounts, coming in at number 47 and 48 on the N64's best sellers list, with both also earning the Player's Choice label. For Bomberman 64, I just kept wishing for more puzzles, more interesting things to do in the levels, more depth. I didn't feel a great increase in difficulty or complexity as the game went on, and so a lot of the game just blends together for me. But there is that spoiler-adjacent mechanic, which hides seemingly half of the game behind it. The problem, which again maybe is mine and mine alone, is that the mechanic felt so inconsistent and troublesome to set up that it killed all desire I had to do a full 100% completionist run, and I just wish this mechanic worked better or was taught throughout the game itself, not in a cutscene. And don't get me wrong, I definitely had a good time playing, and that classic Bomberman formula is still fun. And 64 does show several ways that Bomberman could thrive in 3D. But in the end, much like Sirius, I ended up not only a little disappointed in the game, but also myself. So I'd place this game in the nostalgia needed category. I feel like you need some existing love for the series, nostalgia for the game, or some other push to really get the most out of this. And as a casual Bomberman fan that struggled with these early 3D pains, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. Bomberman Hero, on the other hand, is not free of problems, as the puzzle-like nature is thrown in the trash and replaced with a simple platformer that does pale in comparison to other greats of the time. The difficulty here also doesn't increase in a drastic way other than maybe with some of the later bosses, but I really have to commend the sheer variety here. Sure, the flying, swimming, snowboarding levels are kind of confusing additions. Salt bombs aren't all that different from normal bombs. There aren't huge swings and mechanical differences between the first world and the last. But almost every single level had a different platforming challenge. If simple, they also looked different, were filled with different enemies and obstacles to traverse, and they're sprinkled with those minigame-like distractions, and bosses are larger and more interesting than anything we saw in the game before. And while yes, this game also has a 100% completion requirement to see every last bit of the content, it felt like less of a wall than in 64, and I didn't feel like I was missing the best or most interesting content by not seeking it out. So I'm placing Bomberman Hero in the fun but flawed category. It's not going to blow you away with innovative platforming revelations, but it's a fun game throughout, if a little simple. Though Bomberman purists looking for that puzzle gameplay might feel like they've been misled by the name on the box, but he's still a man that bombs in both games. Am I way off? Is this blasphemy to enjoy a Bomberman who jumps? Or did my early exposure to Bomberman Pocket just twist my mind? Let me know. My criticism shouldn't and isn't meant to make anyone feel badly about the games they love, so please share the reasons why you enjoyed these games in the comments. If you'd like to play or replay any of these Bomberman games for yourself, then you're out of luck, as once again, Nintendo's eShop closures have taken both of these games down from the Wii and Wii U eShops. Konami, who gobbled up Hudson Soft in 2012, has been more and more prevalent with its sometimes great and sometimes less than great ports of classic games, so maybe someday we'll see these re-released. But I do find it incredibly odd that none of the Bomberman games have been bundled up and included in a recent collection, of any kind other than a single Bomberman game that was included on the long sold out and now wildly expensive TurboGrafx 16 Mini. The Bomberman series continued long past those two entries, with more on the GameCube, Game Boy Advance, a gritty reboot that was then rebooted back to the classic multiplayer Bomberman during the Xbox Live Arcade era, and most recently in Super Bomberman R and R2, which both feature campaigns that people seem mixed on. But since the GameCube, we've not seen a 3D Bomberman like either of these two. Instead, new games seem to mainly focus on being multiplayer suites. What I also find extremely odd about Bomberman's legacy is that unlike most series with a long history and seemingly nostalgic air around them, there really don't seem to be many spiritual successor-like games out there, or indies taking any of these concepts or gameplay ideas and expanding on them, other than maybe Bombslinger and Ponpu from what I could find. I could 100% be in the dark about a game that pays homage to Bomberman, so please let me know if you have any to share. And with that, I am finally checking Bomberman 64 and Bomberman Hero off my backlog and moving on to the next game. Thank you to everyone who suggested I play these games, and again, please share any thoughts and memories you have on these. I'd love to talk more about these and the Bomberman series as a whole. And send over any suggestions you have for games I should clear off my backlog next. I am always looking for new votes to help me decide. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Wait, there's one more?